The photograph of his brother Felipe was worn soft from handling, edges frayed from 2 years of being pulled from pockets, shown to strangers, held during sleepless nights when Cristian Navarro wondered if the man in the picture had ever existed at all. He'd carried that photo through 6 countries, across rivers and deserts, past border guards, and through detention centers. It was his proof, his purpose, his promise that someone was waiting on the other side. The smugglers had been so specific. Felipe was in Phoenix, had paid for Cristian's crossing, would be at the safe house to collect him. They'd even shown him text messages, heard his brother's voice on a crackling phone call, confirming everything. Now, 3 years later, Cristian worked in a Phoenix restaurant kitchen, still carrying the photo, still checking faces in crowds, still wondering if his brother had ever been waiting or if the cruelest part of his American journey was discovering that hope itself had been the lie. But to understand how a 26-year-old mechanic from Sao Paulo ended up abandoned in an Arizona suburb, chasing a ghost who might have been his brother, you need to go back to the phone call that started everything. It came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, waking Cristian from the exhausted sleep of someone working 2 jobs to keep up with Sao Paulo's crushing cost of living. The voice on the other end was barely recognizable. Felipe, his older brother who disappeared for years earlier, supposedly dead in a construction accident that had never quite made sense. Felipe was alive, in America, had been there for years, unable to contact family for reasons he couldn't explain over the phone. But now he had money, connections, a way to bring Cristian over. They could work together, build something, make up for lost time. All Cristian had to do was trust the people Felipe would send. The emotion of that moment, hearing his dead brother's voice, processing resurrection and invitation simultaneously, had overwhelmed any skepticism Cristian might have felt. His mother had cried for weeks when Felipe died. They'd held a memorial service, buried an empty coffin, mourned a body that apparently had never existed. And now here with his voice, older and rougher but unmistakably Felipe, offering escape from Brazil's economic spiral. Within a week, a woman appeared at the garage where Cristian worked. Well-dressed professional, speaking Portuguese with a slight accent. She knew details about Felipe that only his brother would know. Childhood nicknames, their father's birthday, the scar on Felipe's knee from a bicycle accident. She had photos on her phone. Felipe in front of American buildings, Felipe at construction sites, Felipe looking healthy and prosperous. The plan she outlined was comprehensive. Cristian would fly to Mexico on a tourist visa, legitimate and legal. From there, trusted associates would guide him to the American border. The crossing would be arranged, safe, professional, nothing like the horror stories everyone heard. Felipe had already paid $15,000 for premium service. All Cristian needed was courage and a passport. Leaving Brazil felt surreal. His mother, still processing Felipe's resurrection, packed Cristian's bag with the manic energy of someone afraid to stop moving and think. She made him promise to call, to send photos, to bring Felipe home someday, to explain everything. His girlfriend Maria understood but cried anyway, knowing that temporary separations had a way of becoming permanent in stories like these. Mexico City Airport was a kaleidoscope of languages and purposes. Cristian, clutching his tourist visa and return ticket he'd never use, felt like his real intentions were written on his face. But immigration barely glanced at him. Just another Brazilian tourist exploring Mexico. The woman had been right. The legal entry was easy. His contact in Mexico City was a man called Joaquin who ran what appeared to be a legitimate travel agency. The office had brochures, computers, employees answering phones. Only in the back room did the real business reveal itself. Maps with routes marked, photos of successful crossings, the infrastructure of human movement. Joaquin was reassuring in the way of someone who'd given the same speech hundreds of times. The journey north would take a week, moving with tourist groups during the day, staying in hotels at night. No dangerous desert crossings or river swims. At the border, they had arrangements, documents, vehicles, officials who looked the other way. Felipe was paying for best. Cristian would receive it. The journey north was almost pleasant. Comfortable buses, decent hotels, meals included. Cristian traveled with a group that seemed to be actual tourists, providing cover. Only at night did he meet with other migrants, comparing stories, sharing fears, building the temporary bonds of people heading towards similar uncertainties. In Mexicali, near the California border, the tone shifted. The tourist pretense dropped, replaced by serious preparation. Cristian was moved to a safe house with others awaiting crossing. Here he met his crossing group: two Guatemalan brothers, a woman from Honduras, an older man from El Salvador. All had family waiting. All had paid premium prices for safe passage. The crossing itself was anticlimactic after so much buildup. Hidden in a commercial truck carrying furniture, they passed through the checkpoint without inspection. Cristian had prepared for drama, danger, discovery. Instead, he spent 3 hours cramped between sofas, emerging in California with nothing worse than stiff legs. The American safe house was in a suburb that looked like movie sets Cristian had seen. Identical houses with perfect lawns, wide streets, no people visible. They were told to wait. Family members would be contacted. Pickups arranged within 24 hours. The others seemed relaxed, confident in the process. Cristian fingered Felipe's photo, imagining their reunion. The first day passed without concern. These things took time, the house manager explained. Families had to travel, arrangements to be made. The Guatemala brothers were picked up that evening by an uncle who cried at seeing them. One success story, proving the system worked. The second day, worry crept in. The woman from Honduras left with her sister. The Salvador man with his son. Only Cristian remained, increasingly alone in a house that felt less like a way station and more like a prison. The manager made calls, promised updates, but his eyes started avoiding Cristian's. By the third day, the truth was becoming clear. No one was coming. The manager admitted he'd been unable to reach Felipe at any of the numbers provided. The addresses given were fake or old. The payment had come through intermediaries who'd vanished after delivering Cristian. Either Felipe had changed his mind, been arrested, or, most likely, had never been involved at all. The safe house couldn't keep him indefinitely. They were a business, not a charity. If no one claimed him by day 5, he'd be on his own. The manager, perhaps feeling guilty, gave him an address for a day labor site, warned him about immigration raids, wished him luck he clearly didn't believe in. On the morning of the 5th day, Cristian walked out of the safe house with a backpack, $200 a manager had given him from pity, and Felipe's photo. The Arizona sun was different from Brazil's, drier, harsher, less forgiving. The suburban streets stretched endlessly, every house a fortress of American dreams he couldn't access. He walked for hours, no destination beyond a way. The neighborhood gave way to commercial strips, then back to neighborhoods, all equally foreign. His phone, useless without American service, became a dead weight. The money would buy food for maybe a week if he was careful. After that, survival would require decisions he wasn't ready to make. Hunger drove him into a convenience store, where the Pakistani owner took one look at him and knew. The man's kindness was practical. A sandwich, directions to a church that helped people in transition, advice to avoid certain streets where immigration enforcement was active. He asked no questions about Cristian's story, having heard too many variations to be surprised by any. The church basement served meals and didn't check documents. Cristian ate among the homeless, the addicted, the undocumented, all reduced to the same basic need for food. A volunteer who spoke Spanish told him about day labor, under-the-table restaurant work, the informal economy that kept invisible people alive. But Cristian couldn't stop looking for Felipe. Every construction site made him scan faces. Every Brazilian accent made him turn. He showed the photo to other immigrants, asked about men from Sao Paulo, described his brother to anyone who'd listen. The responses were always the same: sympathy without recognition, stories of their own missing people, the vast anonymity of undocumented America. A woman at the church, Sophia, took particular interest in his story. She'd been a social worker in Mexico before her own complicated journey north. She asked careful questions about the phone call, the woman in Sao Paulo, the specific details that had convinced him. Her conclusion was gentle but devastating. Cristian had likely been victim to an elaborate scam. The cartels, she explained, had databases of separated families. They researched targets, learned personal details, created believable scenarios. Someone had probably known about Felipe's death, Cristian's work situation, their family dynamics. The proof, photos, voice calls, could all be fake with modern technology. The $15,000 had come from Cristian's hope, not Felipe's prosperity. Cristian refused to believe it at first. The voice had been Felipe's, the details too specific, the emotion too real. But as weeks turned to months and no trace of his brother emerged, the truth became harder to deny. He'd crossed continents chasing a ghost, abandoned everything for a reunion that had never been possible. Finding work wasn't hard. Phoenix's restaurant industry absorbed undocumented workers without questions. Cristian learned kitchen Spanish, worked 18-hour days, slept in shared apartments with other invisible men. He sent money to his mother when possible, maintaining the fiction that he'd found Felipe, that they were working together, that America was everything they dreamed. But he never stopped looking. Every Brazilian he met heard Felipe's story. He joined online groups for immigrants, posted carefully worded messages seeking information, created social media accounts under false names, searching for any trace of his brother in America. The photo became his talisman, proof that Felipe had existed even if his American resurrection hadn't. A year into his search, Cristian met an older Brazilian man named Paulo who'd been in Phoenix for 20 years. Paulo listened to the story with the patience of someone who'd heard many desperate tales. When Cristian showed him Felipe's photo, Paulo studied it carefully, then delivered another blow. He'd known a Felipe from Sao Paulo, construction worker, had been in Phoenix about 4 years ago, but that Felipe had died, not in Brazil in a fake accident, but in America in a real one. An IC raid at a work site, Felipe running, falling from scaffolding, breaking his neck, buried in a pauper's grave under a false name because no one could locate family. The details matched too well to be coincidence. Felipe had made it to America, had lived the life he'd promised to share with Cristian, had died alone, his family believing him already dead, never knowing he'd managed to escape Brazil only to find death in Phoenix. The phone call, the promises, the entire elaborate scheme, all built on the tragedy of a man who died twice, once in fiction and once in fact. Cristian visited the grave Paulo described, a number more than a name, in a section reserved for the unclaimed and undocumented. He left Felipe's photo there, weighted with stones, finally delivering his brother to a resting place. Said prayers in Portuguese for a reunion that had happened too late, in the wrong country, between the living and the dead. The truth should have freed him to return to Brazil. The search was over, the mystery solved, the brother confirmed dead, but Cristian stayed. Partly because returning meant admitting failure and loss. Partly because he'd built a life, however shadowy, in Phoenix. Mostly because he felt closer to Felipe here, in the city where his brother had lived and died, than in the Brazil they'd both fled. He learned the full story gradually. The woman in Sao Paulo had been real, had known Felipe briefly before his death. The cartel had used her knowledge, her access to family information, to construct the elaborate deception. The $15,000 had been pure profit. Cristian had paid his own way, believing someone was waiting. The cruelest scams were built on love and hope. 3 years later, Cristian still worked in Phoenix. Still undocumented but established, part of the invisible workforce that kept the city running. He'd learned English, saved money, built friendships with other migrants who understood loss without needing explanations. Sometimes he'd pass a suburban safe house where he'd waited for Felipe, now just another identical home hiding other stories. He kept a new photo now, himself at Felipe's grave, proof of a reunion that had happened in the only way possible. When new arrivals shared stories of family waiting in America, Cristian listened without judgment. Hope was its own necessity, even when built on lies. Sometimes especially then. The phone call at 3 a.m. had changed everything. A dead brother's voice promising reunion, offering escape, providing purpose. Cristian had followed that voice across continents, through borders, into a country that absorbed him without acknowledgement. He'd found Felipe eventually, just not in any way that mattered to anyone but him. On quiet nights in his shared apartment, Cristian sometimes calculated the cost. $15,000 paid by someone for something. Years of searching for a man already dead. A life in Brazil traded for existence in America's shadows. A mother who still believed her sons were together. A grave marked by numbers rather than names. But cost accounting missed the deeper mathematics. He loved his brother enough to believe impossible things. Had crossed borders most people only dreamed of crossing. Had survived abandonment and built something resembling a life. Had given Felipe a witness to his American death. Someone to remember he'd existed in Phoenix before the fall. They'd told him Felipe was waiting. In the end, in the cruelest and most truthful way, he had been waiting in a pauper's grave for someone to discover his real story, to mourn his real death, to complete a journey that started with resurrection and ended with proper burial. Cristian Navarro had paid everything to reach a brother who was never there, or who was only there in a way the dead are present, in graves and memories and the spaces between what we're promised and what we find. He crossed borders to discover that some reunions happen only in the heart, and some searches end exactly where they must, at the intersection of love and loss, in cities full of shadows where the living seek the dead, and sometimes, against all odds and reason, find them.